In the quiet town of Robinson, Texas, on a cool November morning in 2005, the Gentry household was shattered by a tragedy that at first looked like an accident, later appeared like a mystery, and eventually unfolded into a dark story of betrayal, deception, and murder. Because at around 6:15 a.m., a frantic 911 call was made by a young wife named Darlene Gentry, her voice trembling as she told the operator that her husband Keith was lying in bed, unresponsive, with what seemed to be a gunshot wound. And as paramedics rushed to the home, they tried desperately to save him. But soon after, he was declared dead, leaving behind not only a grieving family, but also a puzzled community that could not understand how a healthy young man could suddenly be gone. And at first, the scene raised more questions than answers, because Darlene claimed she had been asleep. She claimed she woke to find her husband wounded, and she insisted that the back door of their home was unlocked. A gun cabinet was open, and it seemed as though someone had broken in and used their own weapons against them, which led investigators to initially consider the possibility of a burglary gone wrong. Yet as detectives walked through the home, something did not quite fit, because nothing appeared stolen, nothing seemed ransacked, and the only victim was Keith, who had been shot in such a precise way that the randomness of a break-in did not match. And the deeper they looked, the more troubling details emerged. For example, when police were granted permission to search the home, they found latex gloves. Inside the gloves, they found shell casings, including a .22 caliber bullet casing that matched the type of ammunition believed to have killed Keith. And tests later confirmed the presence of gunshot residue with DNA from both Darlene and Keith, which complicated her claims of innocence, because why would gloves containing such incriminating evidence be present in her own home if she truly had nothing to hide? And as this evidence stacked up, investigators also began to trace Darlene's behavior after her husband's death, noticing how she acted, the choices she made, and the strange conversations she engaged in, which eventually led them to uncover a shocking attempt to conceal the murder weapon itself. Because while friends and family gathered to mourn, while Keith's parents still supported their daughter-in-law, believing she too was a victim, Darlene secretly reached out to a man named Robert Pavelka, who owned land with a pond, and she expressed interest in buying part of it, but not for the reasons one might expect. Because initially she talked about how Keith had loved the idea of a pond for their children to fish in. Yet not long after, she shifted her story and asked Pavelka to have the pond filled in, drained, or covered, a strange request that raised his suspicions. And when Pavelka told the police, detectives sent a dive team into that pond, discovering at the bottom a .22 caliber revolver, the very kind of weapon that matched the crime, which then turned suspicion into near certainty. Because not only had they found the likely murder weapon, but Darlene had practically directed them toward it through her actions. And as if that were not enough, police installed surveillance equipment near the pond. And on a later day, hidden cameras captured her walking deliberately to the spot where the weapon had been found, wearing knee-high boots, combing the muddy ground with clear intent to check whether her secret was still safe, not realizing every move was being recorded. And those tapes would later become some of the most damning evidence against her in court, evidence that contradicted her claims of being an innocent widow blindsided by violence. Because if she truly had no part in her husband's death, why would she be so desperate to tamper with the very place where the murder weapon was hidden? And so by the time the case went to trial, the prosecution had built a compelling narrative, one that painted Darlene as a woman who on the surface lived the perfect suburban life, married with children, once a prom queen, admired for her beauty and charm, yet beneath that facade was a darker reality of financial strain, selfish desires, and a willingness to eliminate her husband when he no longer fit the picture she wanted for herself. And in the courtroom, her lawyers fought hard. They argued that the video should not be allowed, claiming her constitutional right to counsel had been violated because by then she was already represented by an attorney. They argued that the media attention had poisoned the jury pool, demanding a change of venue.
They tried to introduce alternative theories, such as suggesting Keith's own health issues or possible affairs might have given someone else a motive, even going so far as to attempt to submit his medical records involving herpes as speculative evidence, hoping to redirect suspicion toward a phantom rival. Yet the judge dismissed such arguments as weak and irrelevant, pointing out that speculation cannot replace solid proof. And in the end, the jury was swayed by the mountain of physical and circumstantial evidence, from the gloves with shell casings, to the recovered gun in the pond, to the video of Darlene herself prowling the crime scene long after the fact, each piece reinforcing the prosecution's claim that she had planned, executed, and then tried to cover up her husband's murder. And when the verdict was read, she was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 60 years in prison, a sentence that reflected both the severity of the crime and the betrayal of trust involved in murdering a spouse. And though she appealed, arguing again that her rights had been trampled, that the media had influenced the outcome, that evidence was unfairly admitted or excluded, each higher court upheld the conviction, with the Court of Appeals ruling that her Sixth Amendment rights were not violated in the way she claimed, because the surveillance and her voluntary actions did not constitute a stage where counsel was required. The appellate court also concluded that the publicity surrounding the case had not been so inflammatory as to make a fair trial impossible, and thus her conviction and 60-year sentence remained intact. And even later, when she sought habeas relief, claiming she had been wrongfully convicted, the Court of Criminal Appeals denied her request for a new trial, sealing her fate in the Texas prison system, where she continues to serve her sentence, eligible for parole only after decades behind bars, while Keith's family, once supportive of her, turned to grief and disillusionment, realizing the woman they had embraced was the same woman who had taken their son's life. And beyond the legal documents and courtroom drama, the human side of this story is equally haunting, because 3 children were left without their father, and effectively without their mother too, since she is incarcerated, a family torn apart by one woman's choices, and a community scarred by the reminder that sometimes evil comes not from strangers in the night, not from burglars breaking down the door, but from within the home itself, carried out by the very person who was supposed to love and protect. And as journalists, documentary makers, and true crime enthusiasts revisited the case, they often highlighted how Darlene's external image as a glamorous wife and mother concealed a hunger for material comfort and control, with some commentators even describing her motives as shallow, suggesting she wanted freedom to live life on her terms without the constraints of her marriage. A theory that, whether or not fully provable, matched the disturbing picture of her actions, because she not only killed, but also schemed, plotting to conceal evidence, manipulating others into helping her, and lying repeatedly to police, behavior inconsistent with someone truly innocent. And so the story of Darlene and Keith Gentry endures as a cautionary tale, not just about murder, but about the masks people wear, the dangers of unchecked greed or resentment, and the painful reality that sometimes justice, though achieved, can never fully repair the damage done. Because Keith is gone forever, the children's lives are forever altered, and Darlene, once a free and admired woman, now lives her days behind bars, remembered not as a loving wife or mother, but as a convicted murderer whose every choice unraveled the very life she pretended to cherish. A tragic narrative where every comma, every twist, and every decision led inevitably to the courtroom, the guilty verdict, and the long, slow march of years spent in a cell. A chilling reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply one tries to bury it in ponds or lies, eventually rises to the surface, just like the weapon pulled from the water, undeniable, damning, and final.